When I bought my house, I thought I was making the smartest investment of my life. A beautiful home, a peaceful neighborhood, and a place to finally settle down. But what I didn't know was that I wasn't just buying a house. I was walking straight into the biggest scam this neighborhood had ever seen. At first, everything seemed normal. The neighbors were polite, maybe a little too polite. The streets were clean, the lawns were perfectly trimmed, and the HOA seemed organized. Almost too organized. But I brushed it off. After all, this was supposed to be a dream home, right? Then, the first red flag appeared. I was unloading boxes when an older couple from 3 houses down walked by. The man hesitated before nodding at me. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said. But his wife? She just grabbed his arm and pulled him away. Weird, but not as weird as what happened next. That night, I found a letter on my doorstep. No envelope, no postage, just a single sheet of paper, neatly folded. As a new resident, please be aware that HOA compliance is mandatory. Violations will result in fines, liens, or other corrective actions. No name, no signature, nothing. I frowned. Wasn't this just a standard welcome packet thing? I hadn't even done anything yet. But something about the wording violations, liens, corrective actions felt more like a warning than a greeting. I stuffed the paper in my drawer and forgot about it. Big mistake. A week later, I started noticing things. A moving truck outside the house down the street. At first, I thought it was a new neighbor moving in. Then I saw the old owners standing outside, looking defeated, watching as their belongings were packed away. The next morning, a for sale sign was planted in their front yard. They had been forced out. I didn't know why, and frankly at the time, I didn't care. Until it happened again, and again. Within 2 months, 5 families were gone. Just vanished. Houses that had been occupied for years were suddenly on the market, and every single one of them had the same listing agent. And then came my first violation notice. It was taped to my door when I got home from work. Failure to maintain compliance. Unauthorized mailbox design. $250 fine. I stared at it in disbelief. My mailbox was the exact same as my neighbor's. Same size. Same color. Same everything. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about rules. This was a test. The HOA was watching me, seeing how much I would take before I pushed back. I should have ignored it. I should have just paid the stupid fine and stayed quiet. But instead, I did the one thing they never expected. I fought back, and that's when I found out the truth. The HOA president wasn't just enforcing rules. He was secretly buying up the entire neighborhood. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. 5 families gone in 2 months? That wasn't normal turnover. That was systematic. And now, the HOA had come for me. I wasn't about to let some clipboard-carrying tyrant find me over a mailbox. So I did the obvious thing. I called the HOA office. A woman answered. Her voice was sweet fake. The kind of voice people use when they're smiling through their teeth. HOA Compliance Department. How may I assist you? I kept my tone neutral. Yeah, I got a fine about my mailbox? But it's the same as everyone else's. Silence. Then a polite chuckle. Oh, Mr. Reynolds. Welcome to the neighborhood. You see, your mailbox is technically non-compliant with our updated standards. I frowned. Updated standards? I checked the guidelines before I moved in. Another fake laugh. The board has been reviewing a few adjustments. Don't worry. We'll send you the new compliance documents. Click. She hung up. I sat there, gripping my phone. She hadn't even let me argue. That was the second red flag. The next morning, I found another moving truck. This time, I stayed outside. I watched as an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Dawson, stood on their porch, looking lost. I had met them once before, on the day I moved in. Back then, they had been smiling. Now they looked crushed. I approached cautiously. Hey, everything okay? Mr. Dawson just shook his head. His wife wiped at her eyes. The HOA, he muttered. I frowned. What about them? His jaw clenched. They buried us in fines. Said we owed over $15,000 for violations we never even heard about. Then they filed a lien on our home. Said if we didn't pay, they'd take the house. So we sold. My stomach turned. 15 grand? How does an elderly couple rack up that much in fines? What violations? I asked. Mrs. Dawson let out a bitter laugh. They said our paint color was fading improperly. Our hedges were too dense. Our windows were outdated. I glanced at their house. It looked fine. Then I noticed something. The real estate agent standing near the for sale sign. The same guy who sold me my house. A slow, sick realization crept over me. Something was really, really wrong here. That night, I stayed up researching. HOA liens, foreclosures, property seizures, and then I found it. A pattern. Every house that had been forced out in my neighborhood, it didn't just go up for sale. It was bought by a shell company. And who owned that company? Gregory Larson, the HOA president. That was when I realized the HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were stealing homes, and I was next on their list. I sat there, staring at my screen, my heart pounding. Gregory Larson wasn't just running the HOA. He was running a damn real estate empire. Every time a homeowner broke the rules, he buried them in fines, slapped a lien on their house, and forced them to sell. And guess who bought up those homes at rock-bottom prices? Gregory's shell company. I scrolled through the property records, my fingers tightening on my mouse. He owned more than a dozen houses in the neighborhood, homes that had belonged to families, real people who had been bullied into leaving. And now, he was coming for me. The next morning, I found another violation notice taped to my door. Failure to comply with community mailbox standards. Second notice. $500 fine. I ripped it off, jaw clenched. Yesterday, it was $250. Now it had doubled? That wasn't a fine. That was extortion. I wasn't playing his game. I wasn't about to be bullied out of my own home. So I did something no one in this neighborhood had done before. I walked straight to the HOA office. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with dead eyes and a fake smile, looked up from her desk. "Mr. Reynolds, how can I help you?" I slapped the violation notice onto the counter. "Yeah, this? It's a scam. My mailbox is the exact same as my neighbor's, and I want this fine removed." She didn't even blink. "I'm sorry, sir. All fines are final." I exhaled sharply. I wasn't getting anywhere with her. "I want to speak to Gregory Larson." That got her attention. A flicker of something, hesitation. "I'm afraid the president is in a meeting." I leaned in, voice low. "I'm not leaving until I talk to him." She stared at me for a long moment. Then, she sighed and picked up the phone. "Mr. Larson, there's a homeowner here requesting to speak with you." A beat of silence. Then I heard it, a chuckle through the receiver. "Send him in?" Gregory's office was exactly what I expected. Overpriced furniture, a massive oak desk, framed pictures of himself shaking hands with local politicians. He was sitting there leaning back in his chair, looking like he already won. "Mr. Reynolds," he said smoothly. "I was wondering when you'd show up." I didn't sit down. "Cut the crap. We both know this mailbox fine is nonsense." He shrugged, folding his hands. "Rules are rules. If you don't like it, you're welcome to leave." I clenched my jaw. That was it. That was his entire game. Force people out. Take their homes. Repeat. I leaned forward, planting both hands on his desk. "I know what you're doing. The fake fines. The foreclosures. The shell company." Gregory didn't even flinch. He just smirked. "Then you should know," he said calmly, "that fighting back won't end well for you." It wasn't a warning. It was a threat. I walked out of that office knowing one thing for certain. This wasn't just about my house anymore. This was war. I walked out of Gregory's office with my fists clenched, every nerve in my body screaming at me to do something. He wasn't even trying to hide it. He knew I had figured him out, and he wasn't worried. That was the part that pissed me off the most. Gregory Larson had been stealing homes for years, manipulating HOA rules, and forcing people out. And when I confronted him, he smirked, like I was just another bug under his shoe. That's when I knew I couldn't just fight back. I had to destroy him. The next day, things escalated fast. At 6 a.m., I was woken up by banging on my front door. I threw on a shirt and opened it to find a tow truck in my driveway. A man in a greasy jumpsuit stood next to it, clipboard in hand. "You're in violation of HOA street parking policies," he said flatly. I blinked. "My car is in my driveway." He tapped his clipboard. "According to HOA policy, all driveways must have a minimum clearance of 2 feet on either side." Your vehicle is too close to the edge of your property line. It's being towed. I let out a sharp laugh. You got to be kidding me. The tow truck started up, chains clanking. I spun toward the sidewalk, and there he was, Gregory Larson, standing with his arms crossed, that same smug smirk on his face. He was watching me. I took a step forward. This is harassment. Gregory chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, Mr. Reynolds, it's just compliance. If you prefer, we can discuss further violations in my office. My blood was boiling. I was 1 second away from knocking that smirk off his face. But I stopped myself because this was exactly what he wanted. Gregory wanted me to lash out, to get aggressive, to cross a line so he could hit me with a legal action, a bigger fine, maybe even call the cops. I wasn't going to play his game. No, I was going to flip the board. After they towed my car, I got to work. Step 1, gather evidence. I spent hours digging through public records, HOA financial reports, foreclosure notices. Every home that Gregory had seized through the HOA had mysteriously ended up in the hands of his shell company. But that wasn't enough. I needed proof of fraud. So I did something crazy. I went door to door. I knocked on my neighbors' doors, the ones still left, the ones who were afraid to speak up. And what I found made my blood run cold. Mrs. Harper, the sweet old lady across the street, fined for improperly maintained shutters, forced to pay $8,000 or sell. The Johnsons, accused of unauthorized exterior lighting. HOA took their house within 6 months. The Patel family, slapped with a $20,000 violation for having a non-compliant front lawn. Every story was the same. False violations, crushing fines, a for sale. Gregory wasn't running an HOA. He was running a damn mafia. I compiled everything, documents, witness statements, recorded interviews. And then I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. A guy who specialized in HOA fraud cases. I laid everything out for him. The fake fines, the shell company, the for sales. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he exhaled sharply. This is big, he said. Like federal case big. If this is what you say it is, Gregory Larson isn't just looking at lawsuits. He's looking at prison. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile creeping across my face. Good, I said, because I'm not stopping until I take everything from him. Gregory thought he had me cornered. Fines, harassment, even towing my damn car. He believed I'd cave like all the others, pay up, shut up, and move out. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't like the others. I wasn't backing down. I was just getting started. The morning after I met with my lawyer, I woke up to find 2 new violation notices taped to my front door. Unauthorized lawn growth, $1,200 fine. Failure to obtain HOA landscaping approval, $3,000 fine. I stared at the papers, shaking my head. My lawn? Perfectly trimmed. My landscaping? Untouched. This wasn't enforcement. This was war. Gregory was escalating, trying to drown me in fines faster than I could fight back. But what he didn't realize, every move he made was another piece of evidence for my case. I pulled out my phone and snapped pictures of the violations. Then I started digging. Step 1, find Gregory's weakness. If he had built an empire off HOA fraud, then there had to be a crack in the foundation. A mistake, a cover-up, and I was going to find it. I went back to the public records, scanning every document, every shady transaction tied to his shell company. And that's when I found it. A property sale. 3 years ago, a homeowner, Mr. Caldwell, had been forced out by Gregory. The HOA had buried him in fines, just like they were doing to me. But something was different. Unlike the others, Caldwell didn't go quietly. He had fought back, and the case had gone to arbitration. I dug deeper. There were sealed court documents. That meant Caldwell must have settled out of court. Gregory paid him off to keep him quiet. I needed to find him. Tracking Caldwell down wasn't easy. Gregory had erased him from the neighborhood like he never existed. But after hours of searching, I finally found an old mailing address, 2 towns over. I got in my car and drove. His new house was small, tucked away in a quiet cul-de-sac. When I knocked, it took a full minute before the door opened. An older man, mid-60s, stood in the doorway. His eyes flicked over me with suspicion. If you're selling something, I'm not interested. I'm not selling, I said. I need to talk about Gregory Larson. His expression darkened. I don't know that name. I stepped forward. Yes, you do. He forced you out of your house, buried you in fines, took your home. Caldwell's jaw clenched. His fingers twitched at his sides. For a moment, I thought he was going to slam the door in my face. Then he sighed and stepped aside. Come in. His living room was bare. No family pictures, no decorations. Just a man who had lost everything and never started over. I know about the settlement, I said, sitting across from him. I know Gregory paid you to keep quiet. Caldwell gave a bitter chuckle. Didn't have a choice. He had lawyers. Money. I had nothing. But you fought him, I pressed. You got further than anyone else. How? He leaned back, rubbing his temples. Then he exhaled. Gregory made a mistake. He forged documents. A lot about unpaid dues. The judge caught it. His eyes met mine. That's why he settled. My pulse spiked. Forgery. Fraud. I had him. If Gregory had forged one set of documents, he had done it before. And if I could prove it, his entire scam would come crashing down. I stood up, shaking Caldwell's hand. Thank you. He gave me a sad smile. I hope you bury him. I grinned. Oh, I will. Gregory had no idea what was coming. He had taken homes from countless families. But this time, he was the one about to lose everything. Gregory had built his entire empire on lies, intimidation, and forged documents. And now, I had proof. Caldwell had been the first homeowner to fight back and uncover Gregory's fraud. But he had been alone. No resources, no legal backing. I wasn't alone. I had records, witnesses, and a lawyer who was already smelling blood. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every homeowner Gregory had ever screwed over. And I was about to give them a reason to fight. I spent the next 2 days digging through every foreclosure Gregory had pushed through. Every case followed the same pattern. A homeowner received bogus fines. The HOA piled on more violations until the amount was unpayable. The board filed a lien on the home. When the homeowner fought back, Gregory produced official documents proving they owed the money. For sale. Gregory's shell company bought the property. Lather, rinse, repeat. Gregory wasn't just running an HOA. He was running a racketeering scheme. Step 2. Turn the neighborhood against him. I started knocking on doors, one by one, showing neighbors the proof. Mrs. Harper's face turned red with rage. He fined my husband into an early grave, she whispered. That bastard. The Patel family? Furious. He stole our savings, Mr. Patel muttered. We thought we had no choice. The Johnsons? Their son clenched his fists. He kicked my parents out of their own home. Within hours, I had a list of dozens of homeowners who had been forced out or threatened. And now, they weren't afraid anymore. We held a meeting in my house that night. 20 families showed up. I stood in front of them, spreading out all the documents, the evidence, the testimonies. Gregory isn't untouchable, I said. We have everything we need to take him down. A murmur spread through the crowd. A shift. For the first time, they saw what I saw. Gregory didn't own this neighborhood. We did. And now, we were taking it back. Step 3. Make Gregory sweat. The next morning, we filed a formal complaint against the HOA with the state attorney's office. I made sure Gregory got a copy. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. Blocked number. I smirked and answered. Gregory, silence. Then, that familiar smug voice. You think you're clever? He said, voice cool. This won't go the way you think. I leaned back, grinning. Oh, I think it will. He let out a low chuckle. You really believe you can beat me? I own this neighborhood. I stood up, walking to my window. Outside, a dozen neighbors were already gathering, sharing files, making calls. Not anymore, I said. See you in court. I hung up. Gregory wasn't smirking anymore, and he damn well knew it. Gregory had spent years bullying, scamming, and stealing from innocent homeowners. He had destroyed lives, forced families out of their homes, and profited off their suffering. And now, his empire was about to come crashing down. The moment I hung up the phone, I knew Gregory wouldn't sit back and take the hit. He would fight back. He had too much to lose. And I was right. By the next morning, the HOA sent out a mass email to every homeowner. Urgent notice. Homeowners are being misled by a disgruntled resident spreading false accusations against the HOA. Do not be deceived. We are taking legal action to protect the integrity of this community. I almost laughed. False accusations? I had documents, witnesses, legal proof. And Gregory knew it. This was his desperate attempt to control the damage. But it was already too late. By noon, the neighborhood was on fire. People weren't scared anymore. They were angry. Mrs. Harper printed out copies of Gregory's financial records and passed them door to door. The Patel family contacted their old attorney to reopen their case. The Johnsons, who had lost their home to Gregory's scam, filed an official lawsuit against the HOA. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was a full-blown rebellion. That night, I received an email from an anonymous sender. Subject: HOA president is hiding something big. The message was short. Check the city's zoning records. Follow the money. You'll find what you're looking for. I frowned, reading it twice. Gregory's scam was already bad enough. What else could he be hiding? I logged into the city's property database and started searching. And what I found blew my mind. Gregory wasn't just using the HOA to steal homes and flip them for profit. He was working with developers. According to zoning requests, there was a hidden proposal to demolish half the neighborhood and replace it with luxury townhouses. Gregory had been pushing homeowners out on purpose, not just to buy the properties, but to clear the entire neighborhood for developers. And the worst part? The board members were in on it. They weren't just approving bogus fines. They were receiving kickbacks. Every forced foreclosure meant more cash in their pockets. This wasn't just HOA fraud anymore. This was organized corruption. And if Gregory thought a few threats and fines were going to scare me off, he had no idea what was coming. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. "It's worse than we thought," I said. "Way worse." He exhaled sharply. "You sure you want to go through with this?" I looked at the documents, at the names, at the proof of everything Gregory had done. I thought about every homeowner he had crushed. Then I smiled. "Oh, I'm not just going through with it," I said. "I'm going to make sure Gregory never sets foot in this neighborhood again." The war had just turned nuclear. Gregory had been stealing homes, destroying lives, and secretly working with developers to wipe out the entire neighborhood. The HOA wasn't just corrupt, it was a criminal operation. And now, I had the proof. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every single person who had been bullied, harassed, and forced out of their homes. Gregory had spent years using HOA rules as a weapon. Now, I was about to turn his own game against him. Step 1. Expose everything. I didn't just send the documents to my lawyer. I sent them everywhere. The city council, the local news, a well-known investigative journalist, the Homeowners Association watchdog organization. And just for fun, I printed out every single document and taped them to the HOA's office doors. The truth was out. Gregory couldn't bury it anymore. By noon, the neighborhood was in chaos. People were furious. Homeowners were marching to the HOA office, demanding answers. Board members were panicking, trying to deny everything. And then, Gregory finally snapped. That afternoon, I walked outside and found him waiting for me. He stood at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, eyes filled with rage. "You think this is funny?" he hissed. "You just ruined everything." I smirked. "I think it's hilarious." His face turned red. "You have no idea what you've done." "Oh, I know exactly what I've done," I shot back. "I exposed you. I exposed your scam. I exposed your entire damn empire." Gregory stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't want to make an enemy out of me." I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. "You don't scare me," I said. "You never did." For the first time since this all started, Gregory didn't smirk. He wasn't in control anymore. He knew it. And then, it got worse for him. Much worse. Less than an hour later, 2 black SUVs pulled into the neighborhood. Not cops, federal agents. And they weren't here for me. They were here for Gregory. Gregory barely had time to react before they walked right up to him. "Gregory Larson?" He straightened his tie, trying to act calm. "What's this about?" One of the agents pulled out a folder. "Financial fraud, racketeering, wire fraud. We have reason to believe you've been running an illegal real estate scheme under the guise of HOA enforcement." Gregory froze. The entire neighborhood watched in stunned silence as he was handcuffed right there in the middle of the street. I crossed my arms, watching as the reality finally hit him. Gregory was done. As the agents led him toward their vehicle, Gregory twisted his head toward me. His eyes burned with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he spat. "You don't understand what you've done." I just smiled. "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "You lost." The door slammed shut. And just like that, the reign of Gregory Larson was over. Gregory was gone, hauled away in cuffs, humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. But even as the black SUVs disappeared down the street, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet, because Gregory might have been the face of the HOA's corruption, but he wasn't the only one involved. There were still board members, still shady deals, hidden accounts, and money trails that hadn't been uncovered. And I wasn't about to let them slither away. The very next morning, the remaining HOA board members held an emergency meeting. Officially, it was about stabilizing the community after Gregory's arrest. Unofficially, they were scrambling to cover their tracks. They had approved his fraudulent liens. They had looked the other way when families were forced out. And now, they were terrified. I wasn't about to give them time to regroup. So I walked straight into that meeting, uninvited. The moment I stepped inside, the room fell silent. "Mr. Reynolds," the treasurer stammered, forcing a smile. "This is a closed session." I dropped a stack of files onto the table. "Not anymore." Every single board member flinched. They knew what was in those files. Emails, bank transfers, proof that Gregory hadn't acted alone. I folded my arms. This ends today. One board member, a wiry man with sweat beading on his forehead, shot to his feet. This is a misunderstanding," he sputtered. "The HOA had no knowledge of." I held up a document, an approval signature. "His? Really?" I smirked. "Because it looks like you signed off on at least 3 fraudulent property transfers." His face drained of color. Then, I turned to the room. "You all have 2 choices. Option 1. You step down immediately and fully cooperate with investigators. Option 2. I grinned. You go down with Gregory." Silence. Then one by one they folded. I resign," the secretary muttered. "I'll cooperate," the treasurer whispered. A third board member let out a shaky breath. It was Gregory's idea. I swear. Within minutes, the entire HOA board collapsed. I grabbed the gavel from the table, holding it up. "This belongs to the homeowners now." And then, I slammed it down. The HOA was officially dead. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People who had spent years living in fear of fines, violations, and threats suddenly felt free. Mrs. Harper walked up to me, eyes shining. "You did it?" "No," I said, looking around at the crowd of smiling homeowners. "We did it. For the first time in years, this neighborhood belonged to the people again." And Gregory? He was never coming back. But as I stood there, watching the last remains of his empire crumble, I couldn't shake a single thought. Gregory had said something before they took him away. "You don't understand what you've done." At the time, I thought it was just empty words. But what if it wasn't? What if Gregory wasn't the only one pulling the strings? What if this went even deeper than I thought? I shook the thought away. For now, I had won. But something in my gut told me this wasn't over yet. The neighborhood was finally free. No more HOA board. No more fines. No more Gregory Larson. For the first time since I moved in, I felt like I could breathe. But deep down, something still didn't sit right. Gregory had been running this scam for years, stealing homes, flipping them for profit, and working with developers. And when he was arrested, he didn't look scared. He looked amused, like he knew something I didn't. And that bothered me. I tried to shake it off. The next morning, a community celebration broke out in the park. Neighbors were laughing, talking, and for the first time in years, there was no tension. Mrs. Harper baked pies. The Patel family grilled burgers. People were happy. But as I stood there, watching them enjoy their freedom, something nagged at the back of my mind. If Gregory was just a corrupt HOA president, then why were there still active property transfers happening under his name? I left the party early and went home. I logged into the county's real estate record system and started searching. And then My blood ran cold. There were 3 new property sales pending under Gregory's shell company. Even though Gregory was in jail, even though the HOA was dissolved, someone was still trying to move stolen homes, which meant one thing: Gregory wasn't the real mastermind. Someone bigger was pulling the strings. My hands clenched in a fist as I scrolled through the records. The new buyer listed on the pending sales? An investment firm, and not just any firm, one that specialized in turning old neighborhoods into commercial developments. That's when it hit me. Gregory was never the end game. He was just a pawn, the real villain, the one who had been feeding Gregory orders, making deals behind the scenes. A billion-dollar real estate company that wanted to bulldoze the entire neighborhood. Gregory had just been the face of the operation, the fall guy. And now that he was gone, his bosses were still moving forward, still trying to steal homes, still trying to erase us. I exhaled sharply, my pulse racing. I had thought I won. I had thought the war was over. But now, I realized the real fight hadn't even begun. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. "We have a problem," I said. He sighed. "What now?" I took a deep breath. Gregory wasn't working alone. The developers are still trying to steal the neighborhood. And if we don't stop them now, I clenched my jaw. They're going to finish what he started. I had spent weeks fighting Gregory, thinking he was the mastermind behind everything. But now I knew the truth. He was just a puppet. The real power, the people pulling the strings, were still out there, and they were still coming for this neighborhood. The next morning, I met with my lawyer in his office. He rubbed his temples, staring at the documents I had found. "So let me get this straight," he said. "Gregory was working with a real estate firm that's still moving forward with property transfers?" I nodded. Even after his arrest, even after the HOA was shut down, my lawyer sighed. "That's bad. Really bad." I clenched my fists. "What can we do?" He tapped his pen on his desk. "We need to stop the property transfers before they go through." "How?" He exhaled. "The only way to stop them is to prove that these sales were fraudulent from the beginning. We need to show that Gregory used illegal tactics to force people out. If we can do that," I finished the sentence for him, "then the entire real estate deal collapses." He nodded. "But we need hard proof." I knew exactly where to find it. Gregory had spent years forging documents, creating fake violations, and manipulating property transfers. If I could find the original records, I could prove that the developers were using illegally seized homes. There was only one problem. The only place that had all the HOA records was the HOA office. The HOA building was still abandoned. The board had collapsed, Gregory was in jail, and no one had been inside since. But I knew the files were still there, and I needed them. That night, I drove to the office. The parking lot was empty. The windows were dark. I grabbed a flashlight and got out of my car. I wasn't breaking in. The HOA didn't exist anymore. These files belonged to the community. I picked the lock on the side door and slipped inside. The office was dead silent. Papers were scattered on desks. Everything had been left behind in a hurry. I moved quickly, making my way to Gregory's office. I opened the file cabinet and started digging. And that's when I found it. A folder marked Developer Agreements. Inside, contracts, emails, and documents, proof that Gregory had been working with a real estate firm for years. And then I saw the worst part. A letter, dated just a week before Gregory's arrest. The remaining properties must be cleared within 30 days. Failure to meet this deadline will result in intervention from corporate. I froze. Intervention? I didn't know what that meant. But I knew one thing for sure. The developers weren't going to stop. And if Gregory had failed, they were sending someone else to finish the job. I shoved the documents into my bag and got the hell out of there. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello." Silence. Then, a voice I didn't recognize. "You're playing a dangerous game." Click. The line went dead. I stood there, heart pounding. This wasn't just about saving the neighborhood anymore. Now, it was about survival. I stood there in the dark, my phone still clutched in my hand. "You're playing a dangerous game." The words echoed in my head. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a warning. And if these developers were willing to threaten me, they weren't just businessmen. They were something much worse. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove straight to my lawyer's house. I pounded on his door until the porch light flicked on. He opened the door, groggy and annoyed, until he saw my face. What happened? I walked in, dropped the folder onto his kitchen table, and exhaled sharply. I found it. The proof. He flipped through the documents, his eyes narrowing. Jesus Christ. This isn't just fraud. This is a full-blown corporate conspiracy. I nodded. And they know I have it. His hands tightened on the papers. That call, do you recognize the voice? No, but it wasn't Gregory. I looked him dead in the eyes. This goes higher. Silence. Then, my lawyer let out a breath. All right, here's what we do. We take this straight to the city council. If these contracts are real, and I know they are, then we can freeze every pending property sale. I frowned. But what if they fight back? They will, he admitted. But they won't be able to hide this. The media will eat them alive. And if we prove they used illegal tactics to seize homes? He smiled grimly. They're done. The next morning, I made my move. I walked straight into the mayor's office. His secretary tried to stop me, but I wasn't asking for an appointment. I threw the folder onto his desk. We have a problem, I said. The mayor flipped through the documents. His face paled. Where did you get these? I folded my arms. Doesn't matter. What matters is that a real estate firm has been illegally seizing homes in this city, and you're about to let them bulldoze an entire neighborhood. The mayor leaned back, exhaling slowly. You realize who you're going up against, right? He asked. These aren't small-time crooks. They have power. Money. Lawyers. I stared at him. So do I. A long pause. Then he nodded. I'll call an emergency hearing, he said. Bring everything you have. The hearing was set for the next morning. But that night, something happened. I was home, pacing, running through every possible scenario in my head. Then, crash. Glass shattered. I spun around just as a brick smashed through my front window. I ran to the door, threw it open, but the street was empty. No footprints. No cars. Nothing. Just a brick lying in the middle of my floor. Taped to it was a note. Stop. Or else. I picked it up, my hands shaking, not with fear. With rage. These people thought they could intimidate me. They thought I'd back down. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I grabbed my phone and dialed my lawyer. We're going to that hearing tomorrow, I said. He hesitated. You sure? These guys don't play around. I looked at the shattered glass on my floor. Neither do I. The next morning, I woke up ready for war. Gregory had been a small fish in a much bigger ocean. His bosses, the developers, thought they could threaten me, silence me, scare me into submission. But last night, when they threw a brick through my window, they made their biggest mistake yet. Because now, I wasn't just fighting to save my home. I was fighting to burn their entire empire to the ground. The city council meeting was packed. Reporters, homeowners, even local business owners. People wanted answers. They wanted justice. And the developers? They wanted me gone. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked in. A group of well-dressed men in expensive suits sat near the back. Calm, silent, watching. But I wasn't intimidated. I had the truth. And when the mayor called me up to present my evidence, I didn't hold back. I laid out everything. The fake fines and forced foreclosures. Gregory's shell company buying up properties. The backdoor deals with developers. The hidden contracts proving the entire neighborhood was targeted for demolition. I turned to face the room, my voice steady. This wasn't an HOA. It was a racket. A corporate scam designed to steal homes and sell them to the highest bidder. Murmurs rippled through the audience. The mayor's expression darkened. Then I pulled out my final weapon, a copy of the threat letter they had taped to the brick that smashed my window. I held it up. These people don't just steal homes. They threaten anyone who stands in their way. The reporters went wild. Cameras flashed. And for the first time, I saw it, the men in suits shifting uncomfortably. They had just lost control of the narrative. And they knew it. Then, the real bombshell hit. A woman stood up in the audience. I used to work for that firm, she said. Her voice shook. Everything he's saying is true. The room erupted. She walked to the front, pulling out a flash drive. These are internal emails. Financial records. Proof that the company deliberately targeted low-income homeowners and the elderly, fabricating violations to push them out. The lead developer, a smug, graying man in a $5,000 suit, shot to his feet. "This is outrageous," he barked. "You can't just—" The mayor cut him off. "I think we've heard enough." He turned to the legal team. "I'm freezing all pending property transfers. Effective immediately." The suits started shouting. Lawyers scrambled. But it was over. The project was dead. The developers lost. And just like that, the neighborhood was saved. Gregory had thought he was untouchable. So had the people who backed him. But today, justice caught up with them all. As I walked out of the courthouse, Mrs. Harper, the Patels, and dozens of other homeowners surrounded me. "You did it," she said, tears in her eyes. "You saved our homes." I smiled. We did it. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was truly ours again. No HOA, no corrupt developers, just people standing together, refusing to be pushed out. And me? I had started this fight just trying to save my house. But in the end, I took down an entire empire. And I'd do it all over again. The end.